Hello, this is Property Matters, a weekly catch-up on the world of property supported by Fairview International Property Consultancy and auctionproperty.co.uk. And we're live every Sunday, 10 a.m, YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn and our website, propertymatterstv.co.uk. And if you're watching on our website, please leave us a Google review. And if you're watching on social media, get involved in the comments section below. Our email address for suggested discussion topics is hello@propertymatterstv.co.uk. The podcast version is available every Monday 10 a.m. from all the main platforms where you normally get your podcasts from, and we're live across the week on Dilsey Radio. It's been a busy week for property news, so let's discuss what's been going on with our property expert, Joe Joshi. Hi, Joe.
Yes, good morning, Paul. Good morning to our viewers and listeners. Yeah, it's a lot going on in the property market with the election looming around the corner in the next couple of weeks. Everybody is hotting up to what they think they want to do, or they can do, or they may do.
And we heard some news this week from Zoopla about the amount of money it now costs to buy your first home. So the average first-time buyer would need to earn $60,600 a year, nearly double the average UK household income of $33,300, to get on the property ladder. Analysis comes from Zoopla, as we say. It suggested that this income will be required for a typical first home worth around £250,000 with a 20% deposit. The firm said this income was $2,400 more than it would have been required a year ago. Zoopla attributed this additional income needed to a decline in the loan-to-income ratio and higher asking prices. It said a typical first-time buyer took out a mortgage loan that was 3.3 times their household income. According to Zoopla, existing homeowners looking to upsize would need an income of $72,600 to buy an averagely priced home of $335,000. This was $3,400 more than an income needed a year ago. The firm said existing homeowners tended to borrow mortgage loans that were 3 times their household income. So I suppose that's not a lot different though, is it, Joe, to the old 3.5 times multiple that we used to talk about years ago?
No, I mean, the reality is it's about the spin on how one is going to sell or try and get the mortgages that they need to get. But the base hasn't changed, as you rightly say, 3.5, maybe 4 times income. It was always a special adjustment for professionals like doctors, nurses, and anyone else that, they saw long-term professional. They might have got a higher multiple. And in some cases, those multiples went up to 5 times, depending on their job security. But fundamentally, it was 2.5 to 3.5 times, or joint income of 2.5. If there was 2 people coming in, living in a house, they might have had a joint income, and that joint income might have been multiplied at 2.5, potentially again 3 times that income, all depending on the criteria that each lender had. So in the sort of grand scale, the amount hasn't changed a great deal. 2.5 to 3.5 thousand pounds increase is what is required, but what you have to also bear in mind, the house prices have also shot up. So the difference always seems to, the gap for what it's worth is the same, because they have to have a higher income, but equally the prices of property have probably gone up as well. So that ratio is probably about the same. But yes, it is important to understand that income related lending is quite important. I mean, one of the things that has been discussed across the board at the moment is when people are renting a property, for example, they're having to put up quite a lot of rental money. So an average income, an average price to rent a 1 or 2 bedroom property is now anything between 12 and 1,500 quid a month. But that isn't then accounted for when it's done a mortgage calculation. They say that your mortgage calculation might be that you can afford less, yet you are able to fund and find the money to rent a property at a rental between 12 and 1,500 pounds a month. So somewhere the sums don't seem to stack up to give the advantages that are required for the first time buyers in the first place.
So much for levelling up, Joe, because if you go and buy a similar property in the northeast, the home would be costing $120,000, and therefore your income would need to be $29,100 for a typical first-time buyer. And then Scotland is close behind that. First-time buyers would be needing to earn $31,500 for For a home worth less than 200,000 in the Midlands, for example, a new homeowner would need an income of 49,000 to purchase. I mean, that is a dramatic difference, isn't it?
It's a huge difference, and there's no such thing as leveling. That leveling up was never going to happen. I mean, it's a new terminology created by Mr. Gove of what he's going to go and level up. But in the time that he's been around, I can't see any leveling up that's happened at all. And yes, it is cheaper to buy a property going north of Watford, as one would say. But the reality of it is, then you've got to add the transportation time to it as well. And that's why it brings people back to London or to the south, where the jobs are obviously, more available, and perhaps a variety of jobs that are available, and maybe even better pays. But obviously, to afford a property that you could actually, classify as maybe 1 or 2 bedroom as opposed to a studio or something like that, then yes, you're going to have to borrow. Sorry, you're going to have to be on a higher earning. But jobs have changed, Paul. Since the COVID, the type of jobs that have changed. I mean, the whole system has changed. There's a lot of now we call like delivery jobs that can operate from pretty much anywhere. A lot of retailers have online facilities. A lot of grocery stores have online facilities, and deliveries are having to be done. And I did speak to a couple of people over the last year where people have said that it's actually been cheaper for them because they get the salary is the same for a delivery driver down here as it would be up there, but it means that they can literally go and buy a bigger house for the same amount being in the north as opposed to being in the south, but having the same job, working for a logistics company doing the deliveries that they need to do. So it's about where somebody wants to sort of settle, but the opportunities are there, and offer a better solution if they want to make that change.
Not so much about levelling up or even levelling sideways. So if we just look at the south of England, the difference, literally that. I mean, Great Yarmouth, you need 33,900 to buy your first property in Great Yarmouth, which is in the south. And then if you look at Kensington and Chelsea, it's 193,900 to buy your first time property in Kensington and Chelsea. So you need 200 grand a year there, 34 grand in Great Yarmouth. So I mean, they're not even levelling up sideways, let alone up and down.
Oh yeah, no, there's just there's no leveling up in this conversation at all, because the centre, London, and the southeast, or the stockbroker belt around the M25 and so forth, is just a law to itself by comparison to any part of the country, whether it's northeast, or even sometimes west. But west is a little bit more competitive purely because the sun seems to set there better than it does rise in the east. So people who have their holiday homes in Cornwall and Devon and so forth, and the areas are constantly in demand. But fundamentally, around the M25 stockbroker and London itself, it is very challenging for people to try and get their first foot on the run of the property ladder.
Yeah, in the Midlands and Wales, 54,000 is the income required. But if you're upsizing in London from your first property, you'll need an average income of 124,600. So says Zoopla. So interesting to see that. I mean, those figures are eye-watering, but I guess it's all relatively relative, if that makes sense, because it's around 3.5 times salary. And talking of expense, of course, the property market was in the news again this week, Joe, wasn't it? Because the Bank of England held its interest rate at 5.25%. Which is the first time, that's been the same since August of last year. So the decision to freeze even rates again comes as inflation, which measures price rises over time, falls back to the 2% target as revealed in the week. As well as the interest rate decision, the bank had just released its latest forecast estimating what will happen to inflation in the UK economy. Andrew Bailey seems to think it's not time to reduce the rates yet. Markets are only fully pricing in a cut in September, but many economists had hoped that the bank would make move this month to cut rates. On one last hold in June, there's still a chance that rates could be reduced when the bank's monetary policy meets in August, of course, in a sign that the central bank may be getting closer to cutting rates. The Bank of England policy minutes said the decision had been finely balanced. So it's the services sector, isn't it, that and pay in particular that's worrying the bank as opposed to the prices in the shops and that kind of thing.
Yes, I mean, look, we're on the knife's edge, aren't we here? And they've got to balance this situation, make sure that they don't do something drastic, and then have to sort of re increase the interest rates. So it's better for them to stay where they are for the time being. Watch this space after the election, and then decide which way it would be. There's going to be a lot of changes. I know there's lots of promises by all parties, but those promises and changes will come into effect around September, I would think, when the world kind of goes back to work. Because after the election, the summer holidays will begin, and it will be time to sort of take a respite for what it's worth from the election, and then decide which way they're going to go. And I think under those circumstances, the Bank of England has probably just sort of thought, well, we'll pause our thoughts to see what will happen in the next couple of months before we start to say, well, we'll drop the rate, and then only to find that they've got to increase the rate. So probably a wise decision under the circumstances. Though, yes, from a property walla, it would have been great to see these interest rates drop, because obviously that motivates the property market in the main. The good thing is, I suppose, that what you've got to bear in mind, that the inflation rate has now finally come to a 2%, which was a big target for them to try and achieve. So I think there will be some sort of cut, but I don't think there'd be a drastic cut, maybe a 0.25% around September.
Yeah, I suppose from a property industry point of view, you'd rather have the situation we've been in 2024 than the one we had last year when we were getting rate increase after rate increase every month. And at least things are stable now, and they might be high, but the fact of the matter is that people can buy knowing that rates are likely to go south rather than north. So, and the suggestion is from a lot of the property professionals in the comments this week that the market is starting to wake up because buyers are realising that actually rates are going to go down, not up.
Yes, I mean rates going down, not necessarily the base rate going down, but I think the stability of a lower inflation and the general feel would mean that they will offer fixed rates that may be over a longer period and at a lower rate. So you might get things like I don't know, 3.5 to 4% fixed for the next 3 to 5 years, knowing where it is. So those are the things that will probably help in September with the housing market and generally opportunity for the first time buyer. I don't see and that the rates are ever going to drop, but much below the base rate is ever going to drop much below 5%. I think it was too low for too long, and yes, the last 14 rate rises has dramatically brought it up to the 5.25. And I just cannot imagine that they were going to start to bring that down only to go back up again. It really does mess up with people's finances, messes up with their mind, and messes up with the state of mind for their family. It really is a big problem when rates go up. I mean, we've not just had rates go up, but we've had the cost of living go up at the same time, and it has been a very, very stressful time for a lot of homeowners and families. So I think stability is quite important at this moment.
Interesting comments from one property professional saying that economists from Capital Economics at the end of May forecast a reduction to 4.5% by the end of 2024, which most people think is reasonably optimistic, to say the least. But it did propel a lot of consumer confidence in May, and as a result of that, the inquiries were at their highest level since December 2021, as a result of people seeing that the second half of the year rates are going to go south and presumably end the year in a good way. And the suggestion from one person here is that they reckon that house price growth could have improved by December to 3%.
That's right. I mean, look, when you look at the growth side of it, for the last since COVID, we went up to about 90, anything between 19 and 21%. last year we've seen probably about a percent in a reverse, which is not dramatic. And if you see another increase over the next year or so, 6 months, when whoever comes in and starts to motivate the market, you'll probably see that there is an increase of, as they rightly say, 2-3%, and so that then firms up, what we've always thought, what I've certainly thought, and that is that you can't beat buying a property. That's part of the reason everybody wants to get on the property market. It's not just about the value of it increasing, it's the whole package. It's about your ownership, it's about knowing that this is something that you're putting into, as opposed to paying someone else's rent and putting into their pockets rather than your own. So, house buying and house ownership in the UK is paramount in pretty much everyone's eyes.
You say that mortgage approvals have topped 60,000 approvals per month for the 3 consecutive months now. And this demonstrates, they say, that buyer confidence has been buoyed by the stability provided by a hold on the base rate. With the election unlikely to dampen this growing market momentum, the UK property market remains in a strong position, particularly with the prospect of a cut on the horizon. So that's interesting, isn't it? 60,000 approvals per month. That's the best run and over for 3 consecutive months.
And I think it'll get better. People are on that win. They know in their own mind, no matter what happens, they want to buy their home. And what's interesting is throughout my life cycle, we've had this. We've had interest rates at 14, 15, 18% at one stage. It never deterred and stopped people buying and getting onto the housing ladder. At 5.25% base rate, it's still a fair rate by comparison. I've always thought that that would be the kind of the benchmark for the future. People will bring it down. I think what will be interesting is how they will actually affect stamp duty for first-time buyers. That's going to be the important thing to see.
Yeah. Sorry, go on,
Go
yeah.
on. No, I'm just saying, and that being at the stamp duty reduction in the first purchase from say 550,000 or up to 700,000 will make a dramatic change. In fact, that change is far better than having the interest rates, yo-yoing, because that is a lump sum of money they've got to find up front. Whereas at least the mortgage money is a monthly payment that they've got to find. So, stamp duty, you can be saving 15, 20,000 pounds. That is a huge amount that it can affect, especially when you've got to find a 20% deposit. And then you find stamp duty on top. So theoretically, you're looking for, 50,000, 60, 65, 70,000 pounds worth of money in your pocket or available to you to get yourself on the housing ladder.
Yeah, I mean, and I read something in the week about the sheer amounts of money that are coming in on a monthly basis to the Treasury as a result of people paying stamp duty. I mean, it's a phenomenal amount of money that they're raking in, and I suppose they're doing that to pay back the debt.
Well, yes, and Sam, look, it's a vicious circle. I've said time and time again, the housing market is the hub of everything. Once they use it as a yo-yo, now whoever comes in will use the same thing. They will use that because they need to increase the sales, to increase the revenue that they're going to get from stamp duty at whatever level, be it at the higher end, the middle end, or so forth. But the system is that unless you get the first time buyers on the first run of any ladder, the rest of it is not going to happen because that's the way it is. Everybody moves up the line and you've got to move them into the areas where they're going to get the best stamp duty, pay the best tax, best income. And that's what the Treasury is interested in. That's what the government's interested in, because that money coming in is the money that's going to help them run the rest of the country. So it's a very, very important part of any government to make sure that they support the housing market the best they can.
Doesn't seem fair to me, though, Joe, that the house buyer is the person that has to pay for the pandemic, and similarly, motorists probably say the same thing.
Unfortunately, we're all in that same boat, but every time it goes wrong, they put the penalty on. It's the same as the man who drinks a pint, and he gets worried because he's got to pay a bit more for his pint. But it's the pandemic took a lot of money I think it was unexpected. It was a world phenomenon that happened. Nobody really planned for it, and it's got to get paid from somewhere. And there's only a certain amount of money that comes in. It's just like your own household, isn't it? You've got a certain amount of money coming in. Some things are going to give, and some things you're going to have to change with. And I think the governments are in no different position. However, the problem is anything that does go wrong, the people expect the government to put their hand in their pocket to say that you got to pay for this, you got to pay for that. And what they're saying is we can only pay for that based on what we've got coming in. And so that income is increased by things like stamp duty, first time buyers, road motorists, taxes, all of those things is what they actually bill us on. And what can you do? You're going to have to pay it. You're going to find it's a bit like the congestion charge board, isn't it? I mean, they started that saying, we'll put the congestion charge on in central London and it will reduce the number of people that drive in. Well, actually, do you honestly believe that the number of people driving in has reduced? No, it hasn't. And he's done that 3 times. But what he has done is given him a lot of money coming in every week from those people that drive in. And so it's human nature that, we will moan about it. But the reality is comfort is also important. So somebody like me, I like to drive pretty much everywhere. So I've got to find that to drive in. I mean, yes, you can do public transport, but that's point to point. You still got to find moving up an Uber or a taxi or some other form to get to where you got to get to. So it's just what we got used to, and so and they know that the government know that, Transport for London know that, Central, the mayor knows it, and they know that you're going to end up paying it, and unfortunately, it's the lesser of the two evils.
Let's look at our final story. Half of HMO landlords, that's House of Multiple Occupation, half of HMO landlords use property as a sole source of income. Seems that this is possibly the only way to make money on on rentals at the moment. Half of landlords with a house in multiple occupation use this as their only source of income, says a new survey. Research from buy-to-let lender Landbay found 30% of landlords polled had an HMO property or portfolio. Within this, 72% owned HMO properties through a limited company and half did not have any other source of income. The research also found that nearly half of the landlords with HMOs self-managed their properties, including a third who had more than 20 properties. The lender said that the reasons landlords were managing their portfolios themselves could be down to the number of properties they held, with 34% having between 4 and 10. The survey found that the highest proportion of HMOs held by landlords polled were in London and the South East at 47%, followed by the East Midlands. Now, I suppose it does mean that, if you take a sort of 4-bedroom house, Joe, and then you make that into 4 separate rooms, you've got 4 lots of 1,000, whereas you probably wouldn't get £4,000 for a house in its entirety to one family.
Well, yeah, I mean, can you imagine that the one family would have a real challenge to find the £4,000, and on top of that, obviously all the utilities, your gas, your electric, your phone, your mobile phone, water rate, whatever the other costs are going to be. So it's not just £4,000 worth of rent; it's also another £1,500 worth of other outgoings. So you're looking at five and a half to £6,000 a month coming in. It's just a lot of money to commit to in the current climate. So yes, it's going to be a challenge for people to take a private rental. But if they're going to do that, they want the best possible house, and they've got to have the appropriate amount of income to be able to justify that kind of rent. So housing of multiple occupancy is now the way. I mean, going back to the early sort of 80s, people used to buy a 2-bedroom property simply to be able to rent the second room out as a subsidy towards their mortgage. And we're kind of almost back to where we are again. People are having no choice but to say, okay, well, if I've got a spare room, or even if I haven't got a spare room, can I make one of the rooms spare and get my kids to share the other room so that I could bring in an income of, between £500 and £700 a month towards the rent of that room. So room rentals are becoming, a big thing. And equally, those that are renting them haven't got much choice because it's impossible to go out there on your own to go and take a 1-bedroom flat. I mean, 1-bedroom flat on the average, as I said earlier on, is anything between £1,200 and £1,500 a month now. That's colossal. It's almost double what it used to be. Not that long ago, maybe 2, 3, 4 years ago, you could have just taken a one-bedroom property and it would have been like 750, £800 a month. And now the same property is, almost double that money. So yeah, it would be a huge challenge.
It's not for the beginners, though, really, is it, HMO? I mean, it's not the same as, because there's a lot more regulation around HMOs than there is just doing simple buy-to-let. So just take us through some of the differences, if you would.
Well, the simple buy to let is on the basis that the whole kudos falls on the tenant to a large extent to maintain their property and deal with it. The landlord has certain aspects of it, and it's pretty much boxed off. Whereas on a housing multiple occupancy, there's all sorts of other aspects that you've got to consider. Some of them are health and safety, fire hazard, types of doors that you have, individual, because there are, more than 2, 3 people as a family. There are maybe 4 or 5 individual people that are taking that property on. So the management of an HMO and the insurance and the security aspect is far greater, and therefore more hands-on. And each time somebody changes, the other thing is, will people get on? Can you imagine putting 4 individuals into a house and they've got to share a kitchen and you've got to share a bathroom? It's a real rotation that has to happen. So people do. There's a lot of demand on HMO, and to get that right. So yes, people do make it as an income because they want to literally be there full time to be able to give support to their tenants to make sure that they work. Whereas if you're just taking an ordinary buy-to-let property, which is perhaps a flat or a house, then you've rented it out to that one person, and the management of that is a lot easier, and there are lesser regulations that you've got to try and deal with.
The report says HMO landlords have received a boost from falling utility bills. This means higher net rental, which can make it easier to borrow a great amount against the property's value. In addition, council tax banding for individual rooms in shared houses has been reversed, so HMOs are classed as a single dwelling as before. So as long as you do the research, they say, thoroughly before making the loop, HMOs can give great returns. So that suggests to me that the landlord actually is responsible for the utility bills, but then presumably that's included in the rental.
That's right, and that's what makes it easier for everybody. So if you've got a 4-bedroom house, I mean, nowadays a bedroom is getting inclusive of rates and rent and so forth, anything between a 900 to £1,000 a month. So it's not small fry, but it just means that that's their total commitment. They're coming in and saying, okay, well, I'm going to pay that, and now I haven't got the utilities, I haven't got the rates, I haven't got the electrics and the gas and the water rates. All that's all becomes the landlord's property. And part of the change that happened in the last 18 months, 2 years, where people have been asked to leave, is simply that, because it became unviable for a landlord to have somebody in a room at 600, 500, £600 a month, and finding that they were actually now beginning to pay for the other utilities from their own pocket. So they had to have them. So we're now on a reversal. Why are we on a reversal? Because there's no properties available. So people are now saying, okay, well, the government's saying we'll make it a little bit more easier for HMOs and landlords to manage that, on the basis that they know that the income is going to be, and there's no properties. So a big house is hard to rent to one family. You're going to have to rent it to multiple people, and they've got to make that attractive because those multiple people don't have the withal and the financial commitment to be able to go and buy something, or sort of rent something all by themselves.
Well, that's all we have time for this week, I'm afraid. We'll be back with some more property matters very soon. Okay.